But really, the aim of tonight is to hear about the Church Life Review Fund, and also to maybe just think a little bit about how that's going to affect Mersey Synod in particular, rather than the kind of the whole national church. I would just say that this meeting is being recorded, because there are some people that can't be here tonight. So Stuart is overseeing the recording. If you'd rather it wasn't, or you weren't on it, can you contact Stuart? He'll do what is needed to make sure that you're not. Shall I pray, and then I'll hand over to you, Miles, if that's okay? So, loving God, we thank you that you meet with us physically, you meet with us in cyberspace, you meet with us when we gather together. And as we gather, we pray now that you would give us vision and clarity, that you would grant us wisdom and understanding for all that the Church Life Review is about. We thank you that you're with us now, and we commit this evening to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Miles, over to you.
You still need me here, Roger?
Grand. Okay, well, thanks very much, Jeff, for that. It's really good to be with you all on this. I don't know how it is up where you are, but it's beautiful down here just north of London. So hopefully you've got some nice weather. I can see sunshine coming through some of your windows. I should say right up front that I'm suffering from my second unidentified lurgy in 2 weeks. So if I need to pause and have a coughing break, you'll have to forgive me. So what I'll do is you'll see that I've dropped in the chat a link to a paper from General Assembly that took place last weekend. If you get a chance to read that after the meeting, I would encourage you to, because I think it will just lay out in a bit more detail some of the things that I'll talk about, and give a bit more of a general update on the Church Life Review. So if you do get a chance to have a flick through that, I would encourage you to. Although I know that going through General Assembly papers is no one's favourite pastime, and if it is, then well, I've yet to meet anyone yet. So what I'll do is I'll show some slides, give a general update on the Church Life Review. I'll try and contextualize it a bit to talk about what that might look like, in different sorts of churches. And then, as Jeff says, I'll do my best to answer some questions. But I think I should say right up front that these meetings always put me in an interesting position, because the Church Life Review is something that the United Reformed Church collectively decided it would be good to do at General Assembly in 2021. That's when the Church Life Review actually kicked off. And so it's a program which emerges from the desire of the church to think about its structures and to think about the sorts of changes that might need to happen in the future. And my role here as program manager is to manage that process. But sometimes these meetings put me in the position of being the sole advocate for the program, which is a slightly strange space to be in. For a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, because although I think it's a really good thing to do, and I'm completely behind it, I'm in my capacity as a professional. And secondly, I'm not a member of the URC. So again, you'll all have to forgive me for this, but I'm actually an Anglican. So I suppose the reason I say that is just to frame the point that this is something that the URC wanted to do, and the programme has been shaped by members of the United Reformed Church. So in many ways, although I'm here kind of selling it in a sense, it's a program which has emerged collaboratively and has been designed collectively. So I'd just like to say that as a kind of framing piece. So I'm going to show some slides, if you'll just bear with me while I grab them. Just get it into the right mode. There we are. Excellent. Okay. Can someone just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides? Grand, thank you. So this is a very similar presentation to the one that was given at General Assembly over the weekend. So if any of you were there, apologies. So the kind of context, the why that we're actually doing this in the first place, and this will be familiar to all of you really. So across Western Europe and in many parts of the world, Christian churches are seeing a decline in their membership. Interestingly, over the last Easter, some of the figures suggest that might be changing slightly, which is really positive. But the broad narrative over the past few decades has been that the membership has been slowly decreasing. At the same time, the regulatory pressures that local churches have been under has increased. So the burdens, legally speaking, that local churches and charities have to comply with have risen. And this really has led to a position where a lot of local churches and congregations are feeling overwhelmed, overburdened, and are really struggling to focus on the things that they want to do as church, as the body of Christ. In the URC, there's a few kind of more specific challenges. So many of you will know that there's a deficit in the mission and ministry budget. Many of the structures of the URC are unchanged since the passing of the original Act in 1972. And so all of these kind of myriad challenges were brought into sharp focus in the way that everything was by the pandemic. And there was a real sense that, yes, this is a kairos moment, a moment to take that God has given us to take some to make some change and to see what we can do to set ourselves up for flourishing in the future. So that last bullet point there really is why we're doing the programme, because there's a sense that carrying on as is was no longer possible. So Church Life Review Phase 1 kicked off after General Assembly in 2021. So there was a big consultation in Yarnfield Park, and really the key question there was, what are the things that we need to think about most critically? But also a really fundamental question is, does the URC still have something to give? And the sense that came out of that meeting very strongly was absolutely yes, it does. And so we need to do something about it. Some of the major outputs of Phase 1, two of them being the Theos report, which was, I think, a study of the URC's kind of missional soul, what it does in the communities it serves. And then secondly, a much more technical piece of work, which was a financial accountancy study, which for its inaccuracies, for its inadequacies, gave us a good sense of roughly where assets, financial resource was around the denomination, primarily focused on those 13 synods and their associated trust companies. And all the outcomes of Phase 1 led to General Assembly 2023. There was a series of papers from the Church Life Review, which can be found in the Book of Reports for any General Assembly enthusiasts among you. And the resolutions in General Assembly 2023 established Church Life Review Phase 2, which is where we are now. So Church Life Review Phase 2 is the design phase. The whole purpose of this is to think about all of the things we've been asked to think about, which I'll come back to in a minute, and return to an extraordinary session of General Assembly in November of this year with a series of proposals responding to our 4 work streams. So we're not actually enacting anything, we're just designing things, we're consulting widely, we're trying to collaborate with folk across the URC, we're undertaking feasibility studies, all those sorts of things that you need to do in order to come to pull together a really well thought through and coherent set of proposals. In terms of who's doing this work, well, there's me and my PA, and then we have a steering group, which is 7 people who are drawn from all walks of life within the URC and who have interest and expertise in all of the 4 work streams. I'll keep referring to those 4 work streams, but don't worry, I will come back to them and I'll explain them in a bit more depth. And then in terms of governance, we've got a subcommittee of the business committee who are just looking over our things like the spending of the programme budget, those sorts of things. And as I say, we're going to bring back some proposals to an extraordinary session of GA in November. But one of the things that's really key for the steering group is how we're actually trying to do this work. So this is not something that's being done in a vacuum. This is not a programme of Church House that's being imposed in some kind of top-down way. The intention is that, and what the way we've designed the programme is that it's deeply collaborative, deeply consultative. So we've held in Phase 2 a series of 4 consultations. In June, we met to consider some of the, last June, sorry, we met to consider some of the high-level options for financial resource sharing. Then in November in Milton Keynes, we came together to think about options for shared services. In January of this year, a very different group of people came together to think about opportunities for new URC communities of discipleship and worship. And that was a consultation called Conversations at the Crossroads. So clearly building on that report that Theos did, which was called A Paradoxical Church at the Crossroads. And then in May, so very recently, we came together to consider, as Jeff referred to, a proposal to establish a Church Life Shared Fund, which I'll come back to in a moment. But the other key thing to say is that although much of the Church Life Review can sound quite technical, can maybe even sound a bit corporate, we are praying, we are actively discerning, and we are very much focused on Scripture, and we're being driven by the gospel. And particularly one thing we keep coming back to in our work is a passage from Jeremiah chapter 29, which I'll come on to in a moment. But really in it, Jeremiah says, you need to just get on with life. You need to think about the things you need to do to change your circumstances. And so this is Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 5 to 7. And I think I'll just read this because I think it really helps frame what we're trying to achieve. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So really, this is Jeremiah giving some much needed advice to the exiles in Babylon, who find themselves under imperial rule a long way away from home. And I think one of the reasons this has so much to say for us with the Church Life Review is I think one of the things Jeremiah is saying is settle in for the long haul, but don't despair because God hasn't forgotten you. Instead, work to change your circumstances, have hope, and take action in times of challenge and change, and also place your trust in God's plan for us. So it has a lot to teach us with the Church Life Review. And then later on in Jeremiah, Jeremiah tells the exiles that God has plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. And again, I think that has a lot to teach us with the Church Life Review. So the 4 work streams which I've referred to, can everyone see that the slide has changed? Excellent, great. So firstly, provision of shared support services. Secondly, employment of lay workers. Thirdly, new communities of worship and discipleship. And fourthly, financial resource sharing. And so all of these work streams that we have in phase 2 respond to resolutions from General Assembly in 2023, which in effect sets out our terms of reference. So with the shared support services, one element of it is a shared resources hub for everyone in the URC, so in synods and local churches. And just a few observations about it. So the content, we've agreed that we need to start small, but not too small. That it should be accessible to a wide range of users and from different walks of church life. It's for everyone. It's not just for one group of people. And that in terms of the people who operate it and resource it, they need to be subject experts. But also that we should upload the content in a sequence rather than try to do everything at once. I think the phrase is not trying to boil the ocean. That we need to have success criteria, that we need to have a mechanism for catching errors, that we need to notify users of content changes so that things don't become out of date, things don't suddenly, you don't access a health and safety risk assessment and it's suddenly out of line with legislation. And also that we need to have a streamlined but representative form of governance and decision making for the Resources Hub. And then some other shared services that we're thinking about. So one of the things we've tried to do is have these things called living labs, which are on the ground experiments, new ways of working. And one that we've tried is a synod-based help desk for people from local churches so that they can just pick up the phone to a number that they know, a single point of contact, and that person will help them or direct them to the right place. So that has been trialled in Northwestern Synod, and the hope is that that would be something that would support the use of the Resources Hub. So, for example, if you were wanting to access a document relating to the letting out of a church hall, and you weren't sure what a particular section in that document meant, you could pick up the phone to this help desk and someone would help contextualize it and help you understand, or they direct you to the right place. And then we're also thinking about some other shared services, so things like IT, HR, payroll, some of those things that are things you just have to do, but take up a lot of time, can really place burdens on churches and synods as well to some extent. Group purchasing and buying. We know that local churches struggle with energy contracts, for instance, so we're thinking about ways that we can help with that and potentially bring the costs down by doing things, by creating economies of scale. And also accounting support. So we know that one thing local churches really struggle with in certain cases is not being able to find a treasurer, not being able to prepare their accounts. It's something that legally churches have to do, and anecdotally, we know of several cases where the inability to do their accounts or get a treasurer has brought churches to the brink of closure or to closure, and that's something that we'd like to design a service to prevent. And then lay workers. It's true to say that we have fewer ministers and fewer volunteers, and so we need to think about other ways that we can resource our churches. And one thing that we know is that many local churches have lay workers, but lots want them but don't have them. And the reason might be they lack the funds, but also maybe they lack the confidence. It might be that churches don't feel that they could employ a lay worker in a way that wouldn't end up with the elders being hauled in front of a tribunal. So what we'd like to do, what we're doing with this piece of work, is we're thinking about what advice we can give to local churches so that they can hire lay workers in a way that's safe and that limits the liability of the church officers and the elders, but also hopefully provide some funds through the Church Life Fund. There's a big question around who the employing entity is. So many local churches aren't actually a legal entity in their own right. So there's questions around whether that's appropriate, an appropriate way to hire a lay worker, because the representatives of the church, i.e. the elders, have unlimited legal liability. And so there are ongoing conversations about whether in certain cases synod trust companies could act as the employer on behalf of local churches. Although it's important to say that that is not applicable across the board for every synod trust. We commissioned an external research agency called IDO to undertake 8 case studies looking at all different types of lay worker employment across the URC to see what's working well, what's not working well, which models are the most successful. And the honest answer is there are pros and cons with both. And so there's no intention to say this is the way it must be done. What we'd like to say is here are the ways it can be done safely and legally and in a way that is meets all of the regulations legally, but also that is pastorally caring both to those employing and to those who are being employed. We've got some legal advice on some of the risks, and the hope is that we'll make some funding available for lay worker applications. And now I think the work stream that people get most excited about, and it really is exciting. So thinking about some of the ways that we can equip and financially resource new URC communities of worship and discipleship. And we've just finished putting the proposal together for this, which will be brought before GA in November. But the hope is that these will be intentional new communities, so that we'll actually set out here to create these new communities. Some of them may go on to become local churches of the URC, recognised by General Assembly. Some of them won't. And that's not a bad thing. Part of the point of this is that these are intentional but not restrictive. So we're trying to be permissive in a way that allows these new communities to have a chance of flourishing, whilst also accepting that not everything we set out to do is going to work. These could be alongside existing churches. They might be something to revitalise an existing congregation, or they might be something entirely new in a place where the URC doesn't currently have a presence, but sees that it would be able to make a difference to the spiritual lives of the community. In terms of funding, again, we hope that this will be funded through the Church Life Fund. Some might need some more significant startup funding. Some might need ongoing funding if they're not able to work towards kind of self-reliance. But some might need not so much. So again, we're trying to create an infrastructure where new communities can access what they need. And then just 3 E's here. We want to be experimental. We want to try new things. So we don't necessarily want to recreate what we've already got. We want this to be an evolution We want this to carry the URC into the future alongside all of our existing communities. But we also accept that these need to be evaluated according to their own success criteria. So rather than saying these are the things each new community must do, what we'd prefer to say is, what does a new community aim to do, and is it achieving what it wants to do? So the Church Life Fund. So in terms of what it's for funding shared support services, enabling the employment of lay workers in local church roles, and for resourcing the creation of new communities of worship and discipleship. So all those areas I've just covered. And in terms of how this will be paid into, synods, it is hoped, will contribute to this fund, and therefore we would like to have a governance function which is representative of all 13 synods. So it won't be the case that no synod will be unrepresented in the decision-making process. We're also really keen to create an avenue for local churches and external bodies to be able to contribute into the fund. And of course, there'll be absolutely no expectation whatsoever that local churches will contribute. But if a local church wanted to contribute, they'd be very welcome to. And we would be very keen to explore whether external funding is available as well. And now some principles for how the Church Life Fund we propose it might want to spend its money. So we're going to apportion money across those 3 areas of spend: services, lay workers, new communities. We want to do things well. We want to make sure that the things we're funding have enough funding to work. We want to make sure that lay workers who are employed because of funds from the Church Life Fund have enough funding to do the jobs that they've been brought on to do. And we want to make sure that the services we provide are of a high quality, so that an accounting service really meets the needs of the congregations it's designed for. As I've alluded to, we're not just going to say, here's some money, go ahead and do it. We're going to say, here's some money, but also it's an ongoing conversation. So we would like to see the results of what's being done and then make a decision about what happens in the future on that basis. And a huge part of it is working with honesty and transparency. So the governance function will be designed in a way that is not opaque, that is very obvious what's being done and why it's being done and why decisions are being taken. And I'm just going to now slightly shift from what we've been doing and the sort of proposals we'd like to bring to Assembly into what the difference this might feel like in a local church context. So firstly, I'd like you all to think about an urban church. So many of you may be from that sort of church, and perhaps you've got funds for maintenance just going up and up. You're running a food pantry and providing a service in the community. So you're doing really good work, but you're also struggling with burdens. Maybe there's just endless risk assessments to do. Maybe you've got groups using your church spaces, but there are boxes not being ticked that are putting your church secretary under pressure. Might sound familiar. And so there's little energy left to think about what kind of mission you might like to develop in the future. And there's no time to think about what the vision might be. So what could the CLR do for a church like that? Well, we'd like to provide a central space for agreed documents for things like health and safety risk assessment, for things like letting out of a church hall, for those sorts of things that the denomination is currently providing in many different ways, in some cases not providing in certain areas, that we could do better collectively together. That there might be a help desk that will actually contextualize those forms and say, here's what you need to put in this box, here's what you need to put in that box, and give some generic advice to alleviate some of that burden. Not all of it, but some of it. And maybe also that church would just love to expand their offering in the community, but hasn't previously had the confidence of the funds to hire a lay worker. But if they apply to the Church Life Fund, they could get funding for that community worker. And then even more of that burden would be lifted. There'd be an opportunity for mission thinking across the congregation and hopefully reduce some of that burden and anxiety. But that's not every church in the URC. So another example might be a rural church. I'm sure others of you will know this context well. Perhaps that's a church with people struggle to get to for various reasons. Roads dangerous, fast, constantly closed. There's not really much of a bus service. And so it's a real challenge to connect with the community. Well, in that case, what are the things the Church Life Fund might be able to do? Well, hopefully provide some support for the elders, create a space to focus on that community and mission. And again, hopefully lift some of that burden through the services, potentially through the provision of a lay worker, through some new ways of working enabled by the Church Life Review and the Church Life Fund. And then a third and final example, there might be an area without a church, without a URC presence or any presence from any Christian denomination. Maybe it might be a new build housing estate, and there's a real need, a real spiritual need in the community for a presence, and the URC really feels it could speak into that space. It could cater and serve the needs of those people. And so in that case, the Church Life Fund would hope to make money available for a new expression of the United Reformed Church. Something novel, something to serve the needs of the people who live in that community. Something that is tailored to the needs of the specific community rather than generic, and builds on what's there. And so this all really leads to what the Church Life Review vision is all about, which is a flourishing church, less burdened and better enabled. And then the mission, which is, what we're doing to actually get there. It's all about what we can do collectively as a denomination, coming together to discern where God is working in the church, where God is leading us. Try to enable collective action to support our church communities, both existing and new and future. And the whole urging of the Church Life Review is so that all of the URC's communities, existing and future, can be free to realise God's vision for them and develop their faith through evangelism, discipleship and outreach. So much of it is about focused on delivering for the URC's local church communities, thinking about renewal and growth. But also something that I think is really important to say and name and acknowledge is that we're talking here about quite significant change. And that change can feel quite scary. I have been part of change programs that I've not been leading before, and I know how it can feel. It can feel like really big shifts and the ground moving beneath you. And so a big part of the Church Life Review is finding ways to propose these changes that are pastorally sensitive to the significance of some of it, whilst also acknowledging that it's exciting, it's difficult, and it's an encouragement. So now back into the kind of process. After November, GA, our sincere hope is that General Assembly will see fit to pass the proposals that we bring, notwithstanding any amendments that GA discerns we need to make. It's fair to say we've got 3 quite technical work streams: finance, employment, services. The finance work stream is enabling, it's proposing the establishment of the fund. They've got a fairly medium-term focus. And then the new communities work stream has a longer-term focus. But it's really important to say and to name that the Church Life Review, I think one thing that's happened is because of the name Church Life Review, there's an assumption that it will fix every problem in the URC. and it won't. It will fix some of them. It will fix some problems, and we hope it will make a significant difference. But it doesn't represent a panacea in and of itself. So after November, the hope is that we will go on to implement the outcomes of phase 2. So set up a fund, start providing granting to lay worker and new communities applications, establish those shared services I've mentioned. But that we'll also have a space through the Church Life Review to think about some of those longer term strategic questions, things like property, a really coherent property consultation, things like the M&M budget, things like denominational identity and culture. Some of those big long-term questions aren't being ignored. We're just saying we'll come to them when we've got the urgent things, hopefully, done. And then finally, I think the whole purpose of the Church Life Review rests in that final bullet point, which is it is completely focused on delivering for the URC's existing and future church communities. It's really not about enhancing the centre, if you like. It's completely focused on the local church. So I'll stop talking now. I've probably been waffling for good Lord, the best part of 39 minutes. So I'll stop and I'm very happy to take any questions you've got. Happy to go into more detail on any aspect of it. I'm happy to talk about the governance or proposals for the fund if that would be helpful. But yeah, happy to go where the energy is, and hope that has been helpful.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you for that presentation and for clearing up all those things about the Church Life Review. That's so important. We've got 2 questions in the chat that I'd like to ask first, and then we'll throw it open. If you've got questions, if you want to pop them in the chat, I'd really appreciate that so that we can take them in order. But if you've got a question you want to verbally ask, if you can just raise your hand, we'll see to answer it. So Miles, the first question, are the new communities of worship and discipleship over and above the 13 pioneering posts that were agreed at General Assembly?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I think the thing to say is we would certainly hope that there would be synergies between that work. So it would be very very sensible if those pioneering posts ended up in new communities which had revenue funding which came from the Church Life Fund. So yes, potentially there may be funding for new communities beyond those 13 pioneering posts, but the sincere hope would be that the Church Life Fund would also provide funding for the establishment of those new communities. And I think it's important to say that the new communities funding stream of the Church Life Fund is not intended to pay for ministry. It's also not intended to make capital outlay for things like manses, because if we did that, then the fund would be used up extremely quickly, probably with just 1 or 2 new communities. So yes, I would certainly hope that there would be significant overlay, but it's not just for those 13 pioneering posts.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What comes in on the offering plate no longer makes M&M or running a local church financially viable? Are there models for churches to create income streams apart from the current membership model?
So gosh, that's an incredible question, isn't it? That's a question on many people's lips, I'd imagine. I think it would be fair to say, and it's important to say, that wasn't something that General Assembly asked the Church Life Review to do as part of phase 2. But it can certainly be a part of the conversation in phase 3, one of those long-term strategic questions. And I would also say that my sincere hope would be that certainly as far as shared services, lay workers are concerned, the Church Life Fund would be able to provide expenditure in response to some of those things. But certainly, we can't provide an income stream to every church because, again, the Church Life Fund will be used up jolly quickly. I mean, I think even at the highest end, we'd be talking about £4 million expenditure a year. But that's certainly something that I think would need to importantly be on the table for conversation in phase 3. And I think it's something that many local church congregations are grappling with and thinking about. And I don't think there's an easy answer, certainly not one that I've heard.
Okay, thank you for that. Next one in the chat. Will the process for applying for funding for either a lay worker or establishing a new community be streamlined so that the application process is not overwhelming for congregations?
Absolutely, yes. So this is something we're giving a lot of thought to at the moment. So we know that there's the two conflicting things, aren't there? On the one hand, applications have to be rigorous so that we can be sure that any money that was given out would be used on something that was in line with all of the URC's policy and legally and all those sorts of things. And then on the other hand, we completely understand that many local churches, and even more so in new communities, just would not have the time, experience to put together the sort of application that would be required. So two things to say. Firstly, the application process, yes, we're going to give a lot of thought to how it can be as light touch as possible and still get the Church Life Fund Committee the information they need. And secondly, we're going to task the Church Life Fund Committee with thinking about the sort of support they can provide for applicants, basically. So a few different models, none of which we've actually agreed yet, but just to give you a sense of what's out there. So one model would be you could have a consultant who can actually go and sit with people and say, this is how you do put an application together, this is what you might like to put in it. So it's not a top-down imposition of applications on churches and communities. It's someone to actually go out and sit with you and say, this is how you might do it, this is how you put it together. Alternatively, you could, rather than having an employed person, you could have a network of volunteers. So just picking someone out of thin air, West Midlands have staff who would definitely be in a position to help local churches put an application together. I don't know if Mersey have that expertise in house, but the other way of doing it would be to have a network of volunteers who could go out and perform that same sort of support. So yeah, absolutely, it's something we're thinking about and something that is critical, really, because the consequence will be if we don't do it, that applications will only come from churches who have the expertise to put them together, which would be a disaster.
Mersey have got we've got Helen, who is our fundraiser and bid writer, who's employed by the Synod, and her role is to help local churches to put bids together for funding, currently with external organisations. Okay. Can we get your slides so we can take them to our elders meetings?
Yes.
Okay, so could you probably send them over to Rita, probably, and we'll circulate them. That'd be okay. Fantastic. Here we go, Miles. Here's one for you. How much will the Church Life Review cost?
So in terms of how much it has cost, it's cost the wider denomination nothing so far because its programme budget has come from the URC Trust. We had a very generous legacy fund. Well, I'm not sure if it was a legacy or if it was a donation. I can't quite remember. But essentially, its current programme budget, so staff salaries, consultancy fees, legal fees, the case studies, for example, consultations, that's all come from within a designated fund held by the URC Trust that was set aside for this purpose. So far it's cost the synods and local churches nothing because it didn't come from the M&M budget. How much it will cost? This is a really difficult question to answer in many ways because there's a chicken and egg problem, which is the more we have, the more we can do, because it's going to be partly grant making. My instinct about where we're heading in terms of the amount that we'll get from synod contributions, it will be an expenditure of about £2.5 to £3 million per annum. The Church Life Fund proposal suggests that fund will be established for an initial period of 10 years' time with a review after 3. That's not to say that after 10 years we'll say, right, job done, Church Life Fund closes. But the point is that after 3 years we'll say, do we maintain? Do we extend? Do we wrap up after 10 years? So that's why we're time bounding it. So we're not saying this is going to be a capital endowment model where synods give us a big chunk and then we spend the investment income. This will be a revenue funding model. So how much it will cost, my estimate at the moment is a baseline of £2.5 million expenditure a year, but we're hoping that could be up to £4 million a year. And so much of how much the shared services will cost is currently being developed. So things like the resources hub, the accounting service, a buying service, they're proposals that we're currently working on at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Miles. We've got a question about how Church Life Review is going to be managed. How is the process going to be managed? Collaboration might be helpful. Some initiatives are easy to develop, but need to have a range of developments. So I think it's a question about how it's going to be managed, which I think you've touched on in your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a really key point that probably doesn't get talked about enough, which is that governance. I mean, I am the world's biggest governance enthusiast, which makes me sound really pathetic and sad. But it is true.
We quote you on that.
Yeah, feel free. I think that one thing that has happened before coming to the URC, I worked for the Church of England for about 5.5 years, and I can assure you that I've seen some examples of dreadful program management and governance in many different walks of Christian church life. So it's absolutely key that we set up governance for the Church Life Fund that is light touch enough that it's not completely overwhelming, because part of the Church Life Review is saying we need to do less complex governance. That was part of phase 1, but also a governance function which can discharge all of the duties required of it in a way that is coherent. So we're suggesting that the Church Life Fund Committee has a representative structure, so at least one person from every synod, and cross membership with the URC Trust, so that the URC Trust has confidence in the advice that it receives from Church Life Fund Committee. The reason being that the proposal is that URC Trust will hold the Church Life Fund within its portfolio of funds, because we already have that infrastructure there, but they will take advice on how the fund is spent from the Church Life Fund Committee. So the cross membership will ensure that the advice URCT receives, they're able to act on promptly. In terms of kind of staff management of the individual work streams, that is something we're very much in the middle of discussing. There is an expectation that I will carry on in this role into phase 3. My role at the moment is program manager, so I'm currently overseeing all of the 4 work streams and anything Church Life Review related. But we would need to think more carefully, and it's something that's very near the top of my to-do list, about staffing structures in the future. Some of you may be aware that this is quite a difficult time to talk about staffing in Church House, because we're in the midst of a staffing restructure. But please do be assured that that conversation is underway. But from a governance perspective, we're absolutely certain that this needs to be a representative governance function.
Okay, thank you. Miles, we've got 4 questions left in the chat. We'll see if we get through these, and then we'll see how we've got on after those 4. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, so from North Liverpool, I understand that shared services portal will be built up over time, but what can we expect at the beginning?
Well, gosh, yeah. So some things in life are likely to be extremely difficult. So things like HR advice, because HR advice is so incredibly contextual, that's not something that we're going to be able to do from the very start with the Resources Hub. So what we've agreed is that the very early tranches will be what you might call the easy wins. Now, I accept that there's a degree of danger in calling anything an easy win, because it very quickly might turn out not to be. But if I could give you a few examples of the sorts of things we're thinking about, it might be things like health and safety, moving the safeguarding resources that we currently have over from the URC website to the new Resources Hub, ensuring that there's cross-linking so people don't lose where they are. Things like GDPR advice, data protection and data security, all those sorts of things that already exist in one form or another, or that we can do more simply. Further down the line, we would like to, and I'm sorry, I should also say in tranche 1, if you look on the URC website, there is the most amazing collection of ministries related resources, which currently sit in an interesting format, which may not be the easiest to navigate. So one of the things we're thinking about is how can we move existing resources from the URC website over to this new Resources Hub and make it easier to search, easier to access, much more coherent find things. And so in the beginning, yes, some of the easier wins, and then further down the line, we'd like to start thinking about, can we agree single versions of things like an employment contract? So currently, synods are expending 13 times over energy, effort on getting things like an employment handbook done. So those are the all sorts of things we might like to agree collectively, but this all entails governance and a process for actually making that agreement happen. Which is one of the things we need to think very carefully about. So who holds that governance responsibility? Within which forum would synods be able to agree, and their trust companies agree that the version of a document is the right one? So that's something that is currently was being discussed. And excuse me, some of you may have heard of Plato, which is an acronym which stands for Property, Legal and Trust Officers. Now,
see some smiles and nods there, Miles.
So this resources hub in many ways is intended to do what the Plato handbook was initially intended to do, but in a way that doesn't fall out of date within about a year or two, and is also much more comprehensive. So that is the kind of underlying impetus for it. And there's an ongoing conversation about whether Plato could be revitalized as a forum and function as a place where some of these conversations could happen. But that conversation is still in its preliminary stages.
Great, thank you. I noticed Kerry's got a hand up, and I think it's been up for some time, so we might take Kerry at the end, unless she puts her hand down, in which case we won't. Right, 3 more. Oh, it's gone down. Well done, Kerry. 3 more questions then. So is there going to be a ceiling on the amount of funding that can be applied for? And are the projects going to be time bounded?
So yes, in terms of a ceiling, this is a really interesting question, and it's something that we've all been pondering. I suppose this probably applies most to the New Communities funding, because I don't think that anyone's going to be applying for a lay worker on 120k. So I mean, in terms of the New Communities funding, there's no ceiling proper, in as much as an application wouldn't be rejected if it were on the higher side. It certainly wouldn't be rejected out of hand. But I think the Church Life Fund Committee would expect to see significant justification and risk assessment if it were getting towards kind of £100,000 level. That would be quite a significant outlay, certainly compared to existing New Communities projects. In terms of the scale of the kind of average grant, it's slightly difficult to say, because the URC has a track record of making significant success out of very, very small grants. So at the moment, West Midlands are making, I think, £5,000 available for projects. That's kind of like a micro project scale, but some of them have been successful historically. So no, there's no preset ceiling. Although the more was being requested, the more justification I think a committee would expect to see, naturally. And in terms of time boundedness, not in a traditional sense, really. So the funding would be time bounded, but the hope would be that some of these new communities would go on to become recognised by General Assembly as local churches. And I think that would need to be an evolving conversation between the Church Life Fund Committee and the new community, which is, over time, I think it would be the hope of the committee that the proportion of self-funding might rise potentially, although not in every case. So yes, the funding would be time bounded, although it would very much depend on the nature of the application. Certainly with lay workers, we would expect fixed term contracts, but of course they can be extended as the funding is reapproved. And you'll have to forgive me, but I can't remember off the top of my head the time that the time frames we've agreed. But yeah, because the fund itself is time bounded, at least initially, there's no expectation that we'd greenlight projects that just run to infinity in other if you see what I mean.
Great, thank you. Right, here's what hopefully this will be quite a simple answer. Will the help desk be a real person or an AI bot?
Yes, real person.
Thank you, that'll do. And then a really important question from Alan from Ainsdale. Where do the funds come from for this?
Yes, so this is one of the things that I think is most important, is that the hope is that synods will be contributing to this fund generously. And at the moment, the sense is that from the synods I've spoken to directly and the trust companies I've spoken to directly, that in many cases that will be possible. I've yet to hear from a synod who've said they're absolutely not going to make a contribution, which is really encouraging. I can't speak to the financial position of any individual synod, but in many cases, synods have already identified where within their balance sheet that funding is going to come from. In other cases, not. But the hope is that after synod meeting in October, synods will give us an indication of what their intended contribution will be, so that we can then take that to General Assembly, who will then say, thank you very much indeed, and please go ahead and set up this fund. But it's also important to say, and I think I said this at the start, that we don't want this just to be something that synods contribute to. And when I say synods, I mean the trust company. We'd also like to create an avenue, like I say, so that local churches can, if they wish, contribute. If they have, this is going to sound ridiculous potentially, but if some churches had some free reserves and they felt this would be a really good way to spend them, to contribute them to grow the denomination, to enhance the life of the denomination, and to build towards the flourishing of the future of the denomination, then we'd like to create an avenue for that. And equally, there may be some instances in which elements of the Church Life Fund's portfolio aligns well with the funding priorities of an external funding provider. So, for example, there might be, this is just an example, so this is not meant to reflect anything that's actually happening or might happen. But if there were a funding body which made funds available for projects which address poverty and deprivation, well, one of the criteria against which we'd like to assess New Communities applications is it would be great if some of them were located in areas of enhanced poverty and deprivation, according to the Index of Multiple Deprivation. So there might be a synergy there. So, we might then be able to make an application to that external funding body, and they might be willing to give some money to the Church Life Fund for that sort of thing. So that's just an example, but I think it's initially the majority of it will be coming from synods and their trusts, but we'd like to make avenues for other contributions as well.
Thank you, Miles. That's great. Thank you for answering all those questions. There is one last. We'll let Catherine McPhee have the final word, question-wise. If the hope is that some new communities become recognised as URC congregations, are there plans to review the URC structure to make this possible / easier?
So this is a fabulous question. And so I had a very recent conversation with Steve Faber, who some of you may know is the moderator of West Midlands and convener of the steering group, and also convener of the New Communities Working Group, which is like a subgroup of the steering group, which put together this proposal. And in this proposal, what we've put is that at the moment, this Church Life Fund for New Communities can exist within the URC's structure as it currently stands, but that does not mean that we shouldn't review it. So whilst the URC structure can accommodate this way of working at the moment, it's not to say that it's not something we're going to address. So my instinct, please don't quote me on this, is that a significant part of phase 3, when I said about those longer term strategic questions, we'll be thinking about the church's structures and ways, as you say, that they might be streamlined to make some of these things easier. I don't know if any of you have ever actually read the structure. It's a very long document, and I've only consulted sections of it. I've never read it cover to cover. But certainly there might be sections which could be streamlined or looked at, and that might be part of phase 3, and it might sensibly be part of phase 3. Yeah.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you for giving us your time and for being here. It's much appreciated. Thank you for all the work that you've put in so far into the Church Life Review as well. It's we know it's a key initiative, I think, of the United Reformed Church historically. If you would like to know more about Church Life Review Group, I've put a link into the chat, so if you just click on that, if you don't know how to do that, basically just go to the URC website and hunt around for the Church Life Review group, and you'll find it, because it's quite high up there. Miles, you'll send us through your slides, won't you? We'll circulate those around the local churches, so you can use those as you feel. The next step for Mersey Synod is we'll be taking the suggestion about the Church Life Review Fund to the executive meeting in September, and they'll look at the requests from the Church Life Review group, and then we hope to bring a resolution to October's Synod meeting, which will hopefully thrash out some of the details as to how much we're likely to offer to contribute over. I think it's 3 years, isn't it, Miles? You're looking for contributions for the next 3 years. Or is it more than that?
To be honest, Jeff, I can't completely remember what we said. I suspect that we said an idea of what average annual contribution might be. I don't think we actually said over what period.
Okay. I thought I'd read 3 years somewhere, but if not, that's not a problem. So that's basically the process that Mersey will be following. My sense with the Church Life Review Fund, folks, is I really think it's going to stand or fall on the vision of the local church. So it's going to fall to the local churches to have a vision for what they want to do in the future, and to sort of say, well, we can get funding for the Church Life Review Fund for that. If we don't come up with ideas and with vision for our local churches, then the Church Life Review Fund will remain a very big pot of money that is unused, and that's absolutely not what we want it to be. So I would say take this back to your churches and get them dreaming about what they would like to do in the future, and try not to be limited by financial implications. Okay, well, lovely to see you all, folks. Thank you for being here. Miles, I noticed you put your email address there. Is that for people, if they've got further questions, they can just drop you an email and ask you further questions? Thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely.
Great, that's really appreciated. Okay, everyone, well, have a good evening. What's left of it, sleep well, and thank you for being here tonight. God bless.